Keanu Reeves stepped out of his black SUV, dressed in his usual simple yet elegant style, dark jeans, a black blazer, and his signature long hair slightly tucked behind his ears. He walked toward the luxury watch store, a place known for its exclusivity and high-end clientele. As he entered, a sharp chime echoed through the store, catching the attention of a young employee standing behind the sleek glass counter. The employee, Mark, glanced up from his phone, barely hiding his disinterest. He took one look at Keanu, noticing his casual outfit, and immediately assumed he was just another window shopper who had no business being in a place like this. Mark rolled his eyes and turned back to his phone, ignoring Keanu completely. The store was quiet, its interior gleaming with expensive displays, but the atmosphere felt colder than it should have. Keanu, unfazed, took his time admiring the watches, appreciating the craftsmanship in each piece. After a few minutes, he finally approached the counter and cleared his throat, hoping to get Mark's attention. The employee sighed, looking up reluctantly. "Yes?" Mark asked, his tone sharp and uninterested. "Can I help you?" Keanu offered a polite smile, pointing towards a particular watch displayed in the glass case. "That one's beautiful. May I take a closer look?" Mark barely concealed his smirk. He had seen this type before. People who came in, pretended to be interested, but had no intention or ability to buy anything. He shook his head slightly, his voice laced with condescension. "That watch costs more than a house. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Keanu's expression remained calm, but there was a slight shift in his posture. He was used to being recognized, but he never expected special treatment. What he didn't expect was outright rudeness. "I'd still like to see it," he replied, his voice steady. Mark scoffed, making a show of checking his watch, as if Keanu was wasting his precious time. Reluctantly, he unlocked the case and pulled out the watch, placing it on the counter without care. "There you go. Happy?" he muttered. Keanu picked up the watch gently, turning it over in his hands, admiring the fine details. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mark spoke again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know, people like you come in all the time, pretending you can afford this stuff. It's kind of sad, really." Keanu looked up, his eyes meeting Mark's, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here?" The store manager, a well-dressed man in his late 40s, had been watching the interaction from a distance. He stepped forward, his sharp gaze shifting between Keanu and Mark. Mark immediately straightened, sensing that he might have gone too far. "No problem at all," Mark said quickly. "Just explaining to this gentleman that we deal with high-end clientele here." The manager's expression darkened. He turned to Keanu, his demeanor instantly more professional. "I sincerely apologize for any rudeness, sir. We value all our customers here." Keanu gave a small nod, but he could tell the damage had already been done. The atmosphere was tainted with the arrogance and assumptions of one rude employee. "No worries," Keanu said simply, setting the watch back down on the counter. "I think I've seen enough." Just as Keanu turned to leave, another customer entered, a man in a designer suit, clearly wealthy and exuding confidence. Mark's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He straightened his posture, his voice suddenly cheerful and welcoming. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" The contrast was glaring, and Keanu couldn't help but chuckle under his breath. Before he could step out, the store manager called after him. "Sir, if you don't mind, may I ask your name?" Keanu paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Keanu," he said simply. It was only then that the manager's eyes widened in realization. He paled slightly, recognizing the name. Mark, however, remained clueless, still focused on impressing the wealthy customer. The manager swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had just let one of the most respected and generous celebrities walk out of his store, potentially forever. As Keanu walked back towards his car, he heard the manager hiss something to Mark. The employee frowned, confused at first, then suddenly turned to look toward the door, his face draining of color as he finally realized who he had just insulted. Keanu smirked to himself. He didn't need validation, but little did he know. What happened next would completely turn the tables on the arrogant employee in a way he never saw coming. Mark stood frozen as the reality of his mistake hit him like a freight train. His mouth went dry and his heart pounded in his chest. Keanu Reeves. the Keanu Reeves. The same man who had starred in some of the biggest blockbuster movies, known worldwide not just for his talent, but for his kindness and humility. And he had just treated him like dirt, dismissing him as some broke window shopper. The store manager was already shooting daggers at him, his expression a mix of disappointment and panic. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" the manager hissed under his breath. Mark swallowed hard, but before he could even stammer out a response, the wealthy customer he had been buttering up turned toward him with a scoff. "Wait, you mean that was Keanu Reeves? And you treated him like a nobody?" The man shook his head in disgust. "Wow, that's embarrassing." Mark's face burned with humiliation. He had prided himself on spotting high-value customers, yet he had just driven away one of the most influential and respected celebrities. The wealthy customer turned back toward the watches, clearly losing interest in Mark's fake enthusiasm. Meanwhile, outside the store, Keanu reached his car and paused for a moment, debating whether to let the situation go or do something about it. Normally, he would have shrugged it off. He had encountered all kinds of rude people in his life, but something about this moment didn't sit right with him. He wasn't looking for special treatment, but he despised arrogance and judgmental attitudes, especially from those who thought wealth was the only measure of a person's worth. With a small smirk playing on his lips, he made a decision. Keanu pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Hey, are you still in town?" "Great. Meet me at the luxury watch store in 10 minutes. He hung up and leaned against his car, waiting. Inside, Mark was still trying to wrap his head around his mistake when the manager suddenly turned to him. "You better pray he doesn't leave a bad review or say something publicly," he muttered. "This store's reputation is built on how we treat our customers. And you just humiliated someone the entire world admires?" Mark could only nod, his confidence completely shattered. He had built his entire career on assumptions. Who looked rich, who deserved attention, who didn't. And now he had just realized how wrong he had been. 10 minutes later, the store doors opened again, and this time, a group of well-dressed individuals entered. But it wasn't just anyone. It was a group of high-profile businessmen, collectors, and even a famous sports legend. They all greeted Keanu warmly, laughing and chatting like old friends. Mark's stomach twisted in knots as he realized what was happening. Keanu wasn't just a random shopper. He was connected to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. And now they were all here, in the very store where he had just disrespected him. One of the businessmen, a sharp-looking man in a tailored navy suit, turned to Keanu. "So this is the place you were talking about?" he asked, eyeing the watches. Keanu nodded casually. "Yeah, I came in earlier, but the customer service wasn't exactly welcoming." He shot a glance at Mark, who visibly paled. The manager stepped forward quickly, his tone desperate. "Mr. Reeves, I deeply apologize for any misunderstanding. We value every customer, and I assure you, this was not how we typically operate." But the damage had already been done. The businessmen exchanged glances, unimpressed. The sports legend chuckled, shaking his head. "If Keanu says the service was bad, I believe him. And honestly, I don't think I want to spend my money somewhere that judges people by their clothes." Mark felt his knees go weak. This was a nightmare. These weren't just any customers. They were the kind who could buy out the entire store without blinking. And now, thanks to his arrogance, they were all looking at the store with skepticism. The realization sank in deeper. His assumptions had cost the store not just one sale, but potentially millions in lost business. The manager forced a smile, trying to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we can show you our finest collection in the VIP lounge." But the group didn't budge. Keanu smiled, giving a polite but knowing nod. "I appreciate the offer, but I think we'll take our business elsewhere." With that, the entire group turned and walked out, leaving the store eerily silent. Mark felt the weight of what had just happened settle on his shoulders. He had thought Keanu was a nobody. Instead, he had just insulted a man who had the power to influence an entire network of elite customers. And now the store was left empty, the lost opportunity hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. The manager turned to Mark slowly, his face stone cold. "You just cost us everything," he said in a low, furious voice. But this was only the beginning of Mark's downfall, because what happened next would make him regret his arrogance even more. Mark stood stiffly behind the counter, his face drained of color. The silence in the store was deafening. He could feel the manager's furious gaze drilling into him, but he didn't dare look up. His mind raced, replaying every second of his interaction with Keanu Reeves. How could he have been so blind? He had always thought himself an expert at reading people, knowing who had money and who didn't. But today he had been proven completely wrong, and the consequences were unfolding right before his eyes. The store had just lost not only Keanu as a customer, but also an entire network of wealthy clients who followed his lead. Mark swallowed hard, realizing that this wasn't something he could simply talk his way out of. The manager finally broke the silence, his voice low and dangerous. "Mark, do you have any idea what you've done?" Mark stammered, trying to find the right words. I, I didn't know who he was." His excuse sounded pathetic even to himself. The manager scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's not about who he is, Mark. It's about how you treat people. What kind of idiot insults a customer, let alone someone as respected as Keanu Reeves?" Mark flinched at the harsh words, but he knew he deserved them. He had always looked down on customers who didn't flaunt their wealth. To him, appearance was everything. But Keanu had shattered that illusion in a single moment, showing him just how wrong he had been. Before Mark could respond, the store phone rang. The manager snatched it up immediately. "Luxury timepieces. This is the store manager speaking." He listened for a moment, his expression tightening. Then his face turned ghostly white. "Wait, what?" His eyes flickered to Mark, filling with dread. "No, please, I assure you, this was an isolated incident. Our store deeply values every customer." The caller cut him off. The manager's jaw clenched as he listened, nodding stiffly. "Understood. Thank you." He hung up slowly, then turned to Mark, his fists clenched at his sides. "That was the corporate office," he said through gritted teeth. "They just got a call from a billionaire investor. Guess what he said?" Mark didn't answer. He already knew. "They said they refuse to do business with a company that allows discrimination against customers," the manager continued, his voice rising. "That investor was planning to purchase an entire collection of luxury watches for his clients. But thanks to your arrogance, he's taking his business elsewhere." Mark felt his stomach drop. He had cost the store not just a few sales, but an entire deal worth millions. "Please," Mark started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" the manager exploded. "You didn't mean to judge someone based on their clothes? You didn't mean to insult one of the kindest, most respected celebrities alive? You didn't mean to drive away some of our biggest potential clients?" Mark shrank under the anger in his boss's voice. He had never seen the manager this furious before. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, the store doors opened again. Mark turned, half hoping that Keanu had returned so he could apologize. But instead, a man in a sharp business suit stepped inside, holding a clipboard. His expression was stern as he walked straight toward the manager. "I'm from corporate," he announced. "I assume you're the manager?" The manager nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." The corporate representative flipped through his papers. "We received multiple complaints about an employee mistreating customers, including a high-profile celebrity. Effective immediately, corporate is launching an internal review of this store's operations. And until further notice, all VIP-level sales are suspended." Mark's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just a warning. This was a full-scale punishment. The store's most valuable customers, the ones who spent tens of thousands, sometimes millions on luxury watches, would no longer be able to make purchases here. The store's reputation was crumbling, and all because of his arrogance. "We're also considering personnel changes," the corporate representative continued, his sharp eyes locking onto Mark. "Is this the employee in question?" The manager didn't even hesitate. "Yes," he said coldly. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to protest, to beg for another chance, but he knew it was useless. He had messed up, and now he was about to pay the price. The corporate representative turned to Mark, his expression unreadable. "You're on thin ice," he said. "Pending our investigation, you are suspended effective immediately." Mark's heart pounded. "Suspended?" His voice came out as a weak whisper. "But I don't want to hear it," the representative snapped. "Go home. We'll inform you of our decision soon." The finality in his voice made it clear. Mark had no say in this matter. He had gone from being a confident, cocky salesman to a man on the verge of losing everything. He turned to the manager, silently pleading for a second chance. But the man simply looked away, his disappointment evident. With shaking hands, Mark removed his employee badge and placed it on the counter. His mind was spinning. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just an hour ago, he had been mocking a customer, feeling superior. Now he was walking out of the store, his future uncertain. As he pushed open the door and stepped outside, he spotted Keanu standing near his car, chatting with his friends. Mark hesitated, shame burning in his chest. He wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he walked past them, his head down. But just as he reached the street, he heard Keanu's voice call out to him. "Hey!" Mark turned slowly, his face filled with regret. Keanu looked at him, his expression calm yet firm. "Maybe next time," he said, "you'll remember that respect doesn't come from how much money someone has." The words hit Mark harder than anything the manager had said. Keanu wasn't mocking him. He wasn't angry. He was simply stating a truth that Mark had failed to see. For the first time in his life, Mark felt genuinely ashamed of how he had treated people. And deep down, he knew this lesson was one he would never forget. But what Mark didn't realize was that his troubles were far from over. Because soon the consequences of his actions would follow him in ways he never expected. Mark walked down the busy street, his mind spinning with regret. He had spent years believing that money and appearance defined a person's worth, but today his arrogance had cost him everything. Suspended, humiliated, and unsure of his future, he felt like the world was closing in on him. He reached a nearby coffee shop and stepped inside, desperate for a moment to collect his thoughts. As he ordered a coffee, he noticed a few customers glancing at him, whispering. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but then he heard someone say his name. "That's the guy," a young man murmured to his friend. "The one who disrespected Keanu Reeves." Mark's stomach dropped. How did they know? He grabbed his coffee quickly and hurried to a corner table, pulling out his phone with shaky hands. The moment he opened his social media, his heart nearly stopped. His name was trending. A video had surfaced, security footage from the watch store showing his rude behavior towards Keanu. Someone had leaked it, and now the entire internet was watching his downfall. Comments flooded in, tearing him apart. How do people like this get hired? Judging Keanu? That's a new level of dumb. This guy just ruined his whole career in 5 minutes. Mark clenched his jaw, scrolling through the endless wave of criticism. His hands trembled as he tried to process the reality. He wasn't just suspended. His reputation was being destroyed. His phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Hello? Mark, this is HR from corporate," a cold voice said. "After reviewing the footage and considering the public response, we've made a decision. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "Wait, please, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," the voice interrupted. "Your actions have damaged the store's reputation beyond repair. We cannot associate with an employee who mistreats customers, especially one as respected as Mr. Reeves. Your final paycheck will be sent by mail. Goodbye." The call ended. Mark sat frozen, his coffee untouched. He had lost everything in a single day. His job, his reputation, his sense of superiority. It had all crumbled before his eyes. And the worst part? It was all his fault. He had thought he was untouchable, that his ability to spot real customers made him valuable. But now he realized just how blind he had been. His arrogance had not only cost him his career, but had also made him a public joke. Desperate, he tried searching for job listings, but every luxury retailer he looked up was already flooded with comments mentioning his name. "Do not hire this guy. He disrespected Keanu Reeves." Mark groaned, rubbing his temples. How was he supposed to move forward when the entire internet had turned against him? As he sat there, drowning in his regret, the coffee shop door opened and a familiar voice caught his attention. "Medium black coffee, please." Mark looked up slowly. His heart nearly stopped. Keanu Reeves. Of all places, of all moments, Why now? Keanu hadn't seen him yet, but Mark felt like he was suffocating. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never be seen again. But then Keanu turned, his eyes landing directly on Mark. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to Mark's surprise, Keanu walked over to his table and sat down across from him. Mark swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I know you've seen the video, Mark stammered. I know everyone has. Keanu nodded, stirring his coffee. Yeah, I saw it. Mark exhaled shakily. I lost my job, he admitted. My reputation is ruined. No one will hire me now. Keanu took a sip of his coffee, studying Mark carefully. And what did you learn from all this? The question caught Mark off guard. He expected Keanu to be angry, to mock him like the internet was doing. But instead, he was asking a simple, honest question. Mark hesitated before answering. I learned that respect isn't about money, that judging people based on appearance is stupid, and that arrogance can cost you everything. Keanu nodded, setting his cup down. That's a start. Mark frowned, confused. A start? Yeah, Keanu said. Mistakes happen. What matters is what you do next. Mark had never expected kindness from the man he had insulted. He had braced himself for rejection, for more humiliation. But instead, Keanu was offering him a second chance. Not in the form of a job, but in the form of wisdom. And for the first time in his life, Mark truly understood what it meant to be humble. But what Keanu said next would change the course of Mark's life forever. Mark leaned forward, his hands clasped together as he waited for Keanu to speak. The tension in his chest was unbearable. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee before setting the cup down. You said you learned a lesson, he said, his voice calm. But lessons only matter if you do something with them. Mark nodded quickly. I know. I don't know where to start. Keanu studied him for a moment, then pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. Tell me, Mark, have you ever worked in customer service outside of luxury retail? Mark shook his head. No, I always wanted to work with high-end clients. Keanu smirked. Yeah, I could tell. The words stung, but Mark knew he deserved it. After a moment, Keanu turned his phone around and slid it across the table. Mark hesitated before looking down at the screen. It was a job listing. Community Outreach Assistant. The description talked about helping underprivileged people find employment, training them for customer service jobs, and working with charities to support struggling families. Mark frowned. Why are you showing me this? Keanu leaned back in his chair. Because I think it's exactly what you need. Mark scoffed. Me? Working with people who can't even afford a cup of coffee? They wouldn't want me there. Keanu raised an eyebrow. And why is that? Mark faltered. He knew the answer. Because he had spent years looking down on people who didn't have money, because he had treated kindness as a weakness. Keanu shook his head. Listen, man, you lost your job because of how you treated people. You judged them, dismissed them, and assumed you knew their worth based on appearances. You want to fix your reputation? Then go prove you've changed. Mark swallowed hard. You think they'd even give me a chance? Keanu shrugged. That's up to you. Mark stared at the job listing, his mind racing. A few days ago, he would have laughed at this kind of job. He would have thought it was beneath him. But now he wasn't sure of anything anymore. He exhaled and shook his head. Even if I apply, it won't fix anything. The internet will never forget what I did. Keanu took another sip of his coffee, then said something that made Mark freeze. The internet forgets faster than you think. What people remember is what you do next. Mark sat still, absorbing those words. He had spent all day feeling sorry for himself, terrified of what people thought. But Keanu was right. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could change what came next. After a long silence, Mark finally picked up his phone. His hands shook as he typed out an application for the job. He had never written a resume for anything other than luxury sales, but he did his best. When he reached the section asking why he wanted the job, he hesitated. Then slowly he typed, "Because I need to learn what real respect means." He stared at the words for a moment before hitting submit. Keanu watched him, nodding approvingly. That's a good start. Mark sighed, rubbing his face. I don't know what I'm doing. Keanu smiled slightly. That's okay, as long as you're willing to learn. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since this whole disaster started, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. But he had no idea that his journey was just beginning. A week passed, and Mark's life had completely changed. The first few days were the hardest. He avoided social media, afraid to see more hateful comments. But to his surprise, the internet had moved on. The initial outrage had died down, replaced by newer scandals and viral moments. The world hadn't ended for him, after all. But his biggest challenge wasn't escaping the internet's judgment. It was stepping into a new world he had never acknowledged before. On his first day at the Community Outreach Center, Mark felt like an outsider. He had spent years in luxury stores surrounded by wealth, but here he was surrounded by people struggling just to survive. Many of them were looking for jobs, hoping for a second chance at life. And for the first time, Mark saw what true hardship looked like. It wasn't about whether someone could afford a Rolex. It was about whether they could afford their next meal. He felt embarrassed by his past arrogance. How could he have been so blind? His supervisor, a woman named Lisa, had seen the viral video and knew exactly who he was. "So you're the guy who insulted Keanu Reeves," she said, arms crossed. Mark winced. "Yeah, that's me." Lisa studied him for a moment. "Well, let's see if you can prove you've changed." She handed him a stack of paperwork and sent him to assist job seekers with their resumes. Mark had never done anything like this before, but he took a deep breath and got to work. At first, the people were hesitant to talk to him. They had seen the video. They knew who he was. But as the days passed, Mark listened to their stories. Single parents trying to feed their kids. Veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life. Young people desperate for an opportunity. And with each person he helped, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't just fixing his reputation. He was becoming someone better. One evening, as Mark was finishing up for the day, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, his heart skipped a beat. It was from Keanu Reeves. "Heard you started your new job. Proud of you. Keep going." Mark stared at the message, a small smile forming on his lips. He had never expected Keanu to check in on him, let alone encourage him. But somehow it felt like the final piece of his transformation. Months later, Mark was no longer the rude employee who insulted Keanu Reeves. He was someone new, someone who understood that true respect wasn't about wealth or status. It was about kindness, humility, and the way you treated people, no matter who they were. Sometimes life humbles you in ways you never expect. But in those moments, you have a choice: stay the same or grow into someone better. Never judge someone based on their appearance or wealth. True value comes from character, not status. And if you make a mistake, own it, learn from it, and do better. The world doesn't need more arrogance. It needs more kindness.